And welcome to our adult Sunday school class for Sunday, December 21st of 2025. Second to last Sunday of the year. So the second to last has that weird word penultimate. It's not the ultimate, it's the penultimate. It's the second to the last. So we are on the penultimate Sunday here. And so we are looking at the Lord's people going through their journey, warming up to head into the promised land, finally. So they've been going through their wilderness journey. I know it's sometimes referred to as wanderings, and I've used that word myself. I do appreciate how Dr. Glenn Fritz makes the observation. They weren't wandering, like aimlessly, just kind of spinning their wheels, waiting for everyone to die off. No, they were going on a direction and a purpose as the Lord was guiding them. They went, as we've been looking, they went back down from Kadesh, back down through the Arava Valley, circling Mount Seir, Mount Edom, back to the Red Sea, what's referred to as the Red Sea. It's actually the Gulf of Aqaba there, the Yam Suf, the Sea of Boundary there. Then they made their way back up to Kadesh, which is where we are picking up. And we will be in the book of Numbers, chapter 20. Let's see here. My cursor down there. One of the problems with computers is you do things with your mouse, you do things with the keyboard, and sometimes it jumps between one and the other. Yeah, we'll actually be in Numbers 33 to start off, then we'll be in Numbers chapter 20. So we have finally arrived at the year about 1407 BC. So we're on the last couple years of the 40 years between the Exodus Sea crossing and the Jordan crossing. So here in 1407 BC, we're still Middle Bronze Age, level 2B. China is still being led by Emperor Wairen of the Shang dynasty. But in Egypt, we now have, in their second intermediate period, we have from the 14th dynasty in the north, we have Pharaoh Mibri Sheshi, who's known as Sheshai or Sheshai in the Bible. So he will come up a little later on. He's of the 14th dynasty. The early Hyksos was mixed in with the Amalekites and all that. So he's come in and he's pretty dominant here with these lesser early Hyksos as Pharaoh over Egypt. The 13th dynasty is pretty much petered out now, so we now have just got the 14th in the north. Very low point for Egypt. Babylon is now being led by King Amisaduga. And with the Lord's people here at Kadesh, next to Mount Hor, in the line of Christ in the tribe of Judah, I've mentioned Nahshon, if he would be about 78 years old by my estimates, if he hasn't already died off yet, along with his generation. Salmon has risen up to be 19 years old now, about, by my guesswork, ballpark. Salmon at 19 years old, he is the 29th generation of Adam. He will be father to Boaz and will be the second great-grandpa to David. So now we're looking at the next section of the journey where they're going from Kadesh here up to the plains of Moab, where they'll be getting ready to cross the Jordan River and on from there. So let me pull up this slide right here. Let me go down. That one right there. So this shows the up and down, and we'll talk about this here. First off, Numbers 33, which is somewhat of a summary travelogue itinerary here. Numbers 33, let's look at verse 36. Numbers 33:36 tells us this. They journeyed from Ezion-Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, that is Kadesh. And we tie that with Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. Numbers 20, verse 1. Then the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried there. So a couple things on this. So they had gone up from Mount Sinai to Kadesh. They came back down through these place names that were mentioned to the Gulf of Aqaba, the Yam Suf, the Boundary Sea. And then they've made their way back, and that's what we've just read about. They traveled from Ezion-Geber here at the shores of the Yam Suf, and have made it now back to Kadesh where they were before, only it's now 30 plus years later. So the first month of the Hebrew calendar is Nisan, also known as Abib. So we're in Nisan of the Hebrew year 2355. For us, we're talking about April or so in the year 1407 BC that this takes place. So they make it back up here, and Miriam dies. Miriam is a sister of Aaron and Moses. We're not told her age. We're not told where she falls in with siblings. We know that Moses is the baby of the family, and we know that Aaron is 3 years older than Moses. We don't know where Miriam fits in all of that. She was old enough at Moses' birth to follow the baby along the river as he went over to Pharaoh's daughter and all that, but that's about all we know. So right now, with Moses and Aaron being 119, 122, thereabouts, so Miriam would be in that range. So trivia. There's only one woman in the entire Bible whose age is given at the time of her death. That would be Sarah. And we're told, I believe she's 127, if I'm not mistaken. So, Bible trivia there.
So,
yeah.
How long were they here in this area?
They first came up here in the second year. They then were told about the curse and that they would not cross the Jordan until the 40th year. So they spent 30 plus years, 37 years of banishment basically, and now they're coming back up and they're ready to go get into the 40th year. They'll complete this 40th year and cross. Right now we're in April of 1407. We're in this last year. It's going to be basically a year from now, April of 1406 BC, when they cross the Jordan. So this is the final year where everything's being wrapped up.
So she died after spending decades here.
Yeah, in this area between Kadesh and Ezion-Geber and the sea. Yeah, this. Yeah, for 4 decades, almost. Yeah, almost. After over a year at Mount Sinai, then coming up to Kadesh in the second year, then 37 years of banishment. Now here we are kicking off this final year, this 40th year.
When you think about the journey of it, you don't think about, at least for me, necessarily, unless you pause and stop and think about
there we go.
People traveling and what it involves. You don't think about the life cycle per se.
One of the reasons I'm taking this approach for exactly that.
You know, whether she grew ill or whether it was
old age.
Sudden, exactly, you know, what the situation was.
And it'll be interesting when we get to the deaths of her siblings, her brothers, Aaron and Moses. They both are taken up to a mountaintop to die. So did they just happen to die of natural causes at that time? Or was it, okay, basically the Lord said, your life ends now, and it did.
Yeah, I mean, more than likely they were old.
Oh, there were 100, Aaron dies at 123 and Moses at 120.
Time. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that would be mine.
Yeah.
Time, so okay.
The same Moses who wrote that our lifetimes are 70 years, if we're lucky 80 years, et cetera, et cetera. He lived to 120.
Exactly. So more than likely they were given long lives.
Mm-hmm.
Bodies were just,
Yeah.
so they were set apart.
Mm-hmm. But they still would have been able to cross over into the promised land if not for an event that happens that we're going to be looking at. So even at that age. So it wasn't that they were necessarily going to die here, but we see what happens as we continue in Numbers chapter 20. So I appreciate you voicing that. Anything else from anyone on the death of Miriam here, somewhere in her 120s? So we continue on in Numbers chapter 20. Let's pick up in verse 2. Numbers 20, verse 2. There was no water for the congregation, and they assembled against Moses and Aaron. Then the people argued with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? Why did you make us come up from Egypt to bring us into this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink. Then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Real quick before I get to voice this, just to get it out of my system, talking about them being 123 or so years old now, I'm thinking they fell to their face. Must have been hard getting back up after that. I think I'm 55 and I have my issues. So here we go. The people are complaining. Again. So, Moses has been dealing with this for going on 4 decades here. Think there's some wear and tear? Yeah. Notice a couple things in verse 3. Then the people argued with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. A couple thoughts on this. We know there's some who died with the golden calf incident. There were some who died with several other events that happened. There was a plague in which Moses had Aaron stand between the death that was coming across, between the dead and the living, and Aaron interceded and stopped the plague. So, are they wishing that they had a quick death with the others in those major incidents? Or are they wishing that, along with the generation that's been dying off this whole time, because it's not like out of 2.5 million people, let's say it's half and half, just for simplicity's sake. So 1.25 million of the old generation, 1.25 million of the new generation. But keep in mind, they're still having babies themselves, and another generation's coming up. So let's say we got 1.25 million of these people who need to die off. They're not waiting until you're 40 and then boom, you got over 1 million people dead. No, this is people are dying and being born on an ongoing basis here. So over the course of these 37 years of wandering here, you've got people, up to 1 million people dying off, and some stragglers still left behind. And my point is, with verse 3, are they saying, wow, we have endured seeing all of our generation die off, and we're still here. I wish we had died along with them, instead of being here to see what we're seeing now, is kind of the attitude here. Whether they wished a quick death and the other things, or a natural death with all those who are dying off while they were waiting for them to die, which was part of the mercy of God, that he didn't wipe them all out. As we remember when we talked about that at the time. I'm not going to wipe them all right now. Those 10 spies who brought a bad report, they're dead, boom, gone. But the whole generation, I'll give you 37 years to die off. So, pros and cons to that, we could say. So these people are unhappy and wishing they had died before now. In fact, look at verse 5. Why did you make us come up from Egypt? Because if we remember, they were all sitting on their porches drinking tea and lemonade, and they were having a great time. And then Moses said, come on, we got to go. And they're like, oh man, if you insist, okay, we'll go. And they left everything because Moses said so. Right? That's how it happened? Yeah. No. Moses didn't make anyone do anything. God doesn't make anyone do anything. We answer to God for the choices we make, but this is the whole free will thing. They participated in the Passover out of their own free will. They departed with everyone out of their own free will, as did some of the foreigners, the mixed multitude. They followed through the sea crossing of their own free will, met with God at Mount Sinai of their own free will, entered into the covenant marriage relationship with him at Sinai of their own free will, and are still here because of their free will choices. And they're even suffering because of their free will choices, to disregard the report of the 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb. So here they are. Moses didn't make them do anything. They're here because of their own choices. But do people ever blame someone else when they're suffering the consequences of their own choices? Does that ever happen? Do people ever blame God when they're suffering from the consequences of their own choices? We were just talking about that this morning. Yeah. So, here we are. So, and Moses and Aaron fall on their face, and the glory of the Lord appears to them. Before we continue with verse 7, any other thoughts on this happening here? Before this, the Lord says, these people, he tells Moses, these people have tested me these 10 times. And you can actually go back and count the 10 times that happened. So, more than 10 times now, because this is happening, to Brother Clay's point, again. How many times does it take? When are they going to learn? You ever wonder that about someone? Man, they keep banging their head against the wall. When are they going to learn? Has anyone ever said that about you and me? Yeah, maybe, So God's grace for our humanity, but we don't have to keep repeating the same mistakes. In fact, 1 Corinthians 10 says, Paul tells the Corinthians, learn from their example. And we'll talk more on that as we go. Yeah. So let's go. Verse 7, we'll pick up here. Numbers 20, verse 7. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it shall yield its water. So you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and have the congregation and their livestock drink. So Moses took the staff from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron summoned the assembly in front of the rock. And he said to them, listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. And water came out abundantly. And the congregation and their livestock drank. Pause right here. So, is there a potential problem with what just happened here?
Yeah.
What's that?
Let's see. Shall we bring forth?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't them, it was God.
Great point. Brother Clay makes the observation in verse 10 when Moses says, listen now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of the rock? Notice Moses taking a little personally here. He's starting to feel it. And to Brother Clay's point, no, it ain't you, Moses, it's God. Yeah, you're God's man on the job, but it's God doing the work. As you've said before, it's not about you, it's about God. You've said that many times yourself, Moses. But again, he's feeling the wear and tear and taking it personally. So, are you complaining to me again? You're looking to me again? Here, bang, bang. So yeah, great observation that Moses was kind of missing something here. Well, he had lost sight of the fact that he knows better, that it's a God thing, and his wear and tear from the people seems to be, from the context here, have taken even Moses' eyes off of God for a moment here. Not bueno. Not good. Any other observations on what else could be wrong here with what transpires from verses 7 through 11? Bingo! He didn't do it the way God told him to, Sister Carolyn. So what did God say? What did Moses do?
God told him to speak to the rock and he hit the rock.
God told him to speak to the rock, and Moses hit the rock. Twice. Make sure no one missed it, right? Yeah! Don't do it in anger. Don't do it in anger. Yes. Be angry, but sin not. Yes, as would later be said. So, absolutely, all right on those points. So, how's this going to go over? Let us see. Picking up in Numbers 20, verse 12. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, since you did not trust in me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, for that reason you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Those were called the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel argued with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. Meribah means contention. So that's what the place is referred to as here. And there's a companion passage, in you want to hold your place here, Deuteronomy chapter 1. Moses refers back to this time in his farewell address. Deuteronomy chapter 1. So let's go to verses 37 and 38. Deuteronomy 1:37. The Lord reminds the remaining generation here. Deuteronomy 1:37. The Lord was angry with me also on your account, saying, not even you shall enter there. Joshua the son of Nun, who stands before you, shall himself enter there. Encourage him, for he will give it to Israel as an inheritance. Notice how Moses phrases this in verse 37 of Deuteronomy 1. The Lord was angry with me also on your account. It wasn't what the people did that caused God to be angry with Moses. No, it's what Moses did. Now, what Moses did was because of the people, but Moses let himself be more affected by the people than by God. And yeah, you could inject the people into here, but ultimately this was a Moses and God thing. And that's where Moses suffered the consequences of his failure to be true to God. So going back to Numbers 20, notice how God describes it. In verse 12, and Aaron's right there with Moses on this. He says to both of them, "You did not trust in me." Now, let's walk through this. Let's not miss this. How is Moses getting caught up in the moment with the humans and reacting as a human? How is that, and there's an answer to this, how is that humanity reacting to humanity, how is that a case of not trusting in God? This is important.
I didn't take it as trust.
Exactly.
I just took it as he, out of human anger.
Right.
He didn't do exactly what God said how to do it.
You're absolutely right.
So
let's try to understand God's perspective here, because God means what he says, and what he says is powerfully true. So let's try to wrap ourselves around it and figure it out. How is reacting to humanity and our own humanity a failure to trust in God? If we didn't react to humanity and our own humanity, if we don't take it into our own hands, then whose hands is it in? God's hands. So Moses took it out of God's hands in his heat of the moment, human reaction to humanity. When we leave something in someone else's hands, we entrust it to them. We expect them to take care of what we are putting in their hands. The Lord entrusts us to be stewards of the church and its facilities and each other. We're in each other's care. So there's that. When we place our burdens with the Lord, cast our cares on him because he cares for you, we are entrusting him to handle what we're giving him to trust. Now, the key to that is, side note here, but an important one, trust him to provide his answer. Don't trust him to give the answer that we're expecting to be the answer. He will absolutely have an answer. Might not be the answer, the direction, and the answer might not be the one we're expecting. So our faith and trust is not in him answering as we expect him to answer. Our faith and trust is that he will answer. And his answer will be good and probably even better, certainly not more than probably, than what we were thinking or expecting. But the point here is when we leave it in God's hands, we are, just like giving anything to someone else's hands, we are entrusting it to God's hands. So Moses, taking this into his own hands in his human reaction, took it out of God's hands, which means that by feeling the need, and this is all very quick, but this is how our brains work and our humanity works. It's a very quick process, but it's still a process. Okay, I've had enough of these people. They're not learning the lesson fast enough. Whatever God's doing with them, they ain't getting it. So therefore, this is the logic flow that we don't even stop to think that this is what's happening, but it really is. I therefore need to take this out of God's hands. I need to act on this myself because they're not getting it and I'm mad. I need to vent my frustrations. I need to take it out on this rock and beat it twice. I need to get their attention. And so God, whatever you're doing, you can sit this out because I've got this and I'm just going to do this. Now, we would never calmly, rationally voice these things. But all of those words I just said were just spoken louder than words in Moses' actions right here. That's in essence what he was saying with his actions. Actions speak louder than words. So Moses, taking it into his own hands, was taking it out of God's own hands, which is to say he was not trusting God's hands. And so, what's the moral of the story for us? When we take things into our own hands, not that there aren't things for us to do, we are in teamwork and partnership with the Lord, but be in sync with him and be listening and discerning to him. For there are things that he's going to do that's not our place to do. There are things he says, okay, now go do this. Be hearing him clearly to know the difference. Very important to be walking with him to hear that difference. There was no question what God said here. Speak to the rock, as Sister Carolyn said. He deliberately disregarded what God told him. Here's what should have happened. Here's what could have happened. The people get on his nerves. He's frustrated with them. He stops himself, gets a hold of himself, or even Aaron intervenes and says, hey, Moses, I see you backing up and getting ready to go full swing. Hang on. Yeah, I was here. I heard what God said too. Let's take a breather. Talk to me. Let's stop ourselves, catch our breath, remember what God said. And whatever we do, no matter how bad the people are, no matter how wrong everyone and anything is around us, do not let anyone or anything else cause us to be out of step with God. And that's what happened here. And so it could have been a case of where the flare-up hits, the whoosh, but then Moses or Aaron looking out for Moses say, okay, time out, wait a minute, step back, step aside, catch my breath. Nothing's going to explode right in the next second here, so we can stop. Okay, this is driving me crazy. I'm at my limit. But God said, speak to the rock. Okay, God knows what he's doing. God knows these people. So God knows me and my limits. So I'm going to not let this take me, again, be angry and yet do not sin. I'm going to follow what God said. I'm going to trust God on this, because if this is making me mad, I know it's making him mad too, because we've had this conversation. They're your people. No, they're your people. Okay, I'm just going to trust God. I'm going to speak to the rock and let this play out and see what God does with it. That's what was supposed to happen, what should have happened that didn't happen. And had that happened, Moses would likely have entered the promised land. But God knew. So, Brother Clay.
With me, and I struggle with this, and is they, Moses and Aaron, actually were talking to God. Now we talk to God. We don't have the two-way conversation like they were having, and so my struggle is always, what does God want me to do? And in this decision, turn left or turn right, I'll make a decision to go one direction, but is that the way that God wanted me to go? And I know you're friends with the verses for it, but knowing inside that you say, pray about it. God will give you direction.
Oh, that's such a cliche.
Yes. I didn't mean to say that, but
no, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
So, Brother Clay, thank you for that. It's talking about how we see dialogue. We actually see quotes between God and Moses and even Aaron. And so, so the question is, or the challenge is for us, we don't have God speaking to us in direct quotes like Moses and Aaron did here. So the challenge for us is we're not hearing them like they did. So we don't have that clarity of what's of God or what he has to say. To that I will say yes and no. The verse I was thinking of is Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. Isaiah 30, verse 21, which has come up in other recent conversations, so a significant verse here. Isaiah 30, verse 21 says this. This is 700 years after Moses. Isaiah 30, 21, your ears will hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it, whenever you turn to the right or to the left. Now we might read that verse or hear that verse and go, I wish. Sounds great, but that's not my experience. Well, here's where I would encourage and challenge us. I think the problem is, and I'm certainly not going to single you out, Brother Clay, because I'm right there with you, and I bet most of us are. The reason we aren't hearing God in that context, now I'm not talking like an audible voice in your head, like actually hearing voices. But the reason we aren't hearing God as closely or clearly as we could be, and I'm not rebuking any of us, I'm encouraging all of us and convicting myself with this as well, is that we are not walking and living as closely with him as we could be to be more familiar with him when he speaks. Remember Elijah at the cave there at Mount Sinai. There's the earthquake, whirlwind, the fire, but God was not in any of that. He was in the still small voice. And I was big on this with our whole in-between pastors, and I said that doesn't go away just because we got a pastor for now. Get the ants out of our pants, get the spirit in our spirit. And we're not going to hear the still small voice if we're not being still and knowing. The psalm says, be still and know that I'm God. Cease striving. So all that to say what it takes to arrive at a closer place in that, because God doesn't want us to be throwing darts at a dartboard going, well, I could go this way or that way. I'll just go this way and see what happens. That's not what God has for us. I remember someone breaking my heart in Tehachapi saying, well, this is a choice before me. I'm going to do it. If it's a mistake, it's a mistake. I'll take my lumps. Fear God a little more, and how about if you've lived a little life and you've made some mistakes, you want to avoid them if you can, So if God's available as a resource, and his church and his spirit and his word are available resources to help us from making mistakes, let's stop long enough to look to them. Let's have conversations. Sister Minnie was so big, rightfully so, on the scriptures talking about in the abundance of counselors there's wisdom. So we don't have to figure this out on our own. But the more time we give to God, and we don't, but the more one-on-one time we give with God, prayer isn't just us sending a wish like a note and a message in a bottle and off it goes. No, prayer is us receiving God. And the way we often hear him, in my experience, not like Adam talked to him, not like Abraham talked to him, not like Moses and Aaron talked to him, but it's like all of a sudden, I know the answer. And I have a peace about the answer. That's not something I have to force. It might not have been the answer I necessarily wanted or was looking for or was thinking of, but okay, I spent enough time with you. I've gotten over myself and past myself. Okay, it's the clouds have dispersed. It's clear. I get it. Now I have the choice to either get on board with the program or not. But to get to that point, and I'm not always there, we have to stop, step back, spend the time. Sister Ash.
Well, I agree with all that. And I just want to add, too, that I think we sell ourselves short because we second guess ourselves.
Great point. We have our Gideon moments.
I think we know that God's not going to contradict himself.
Big time.
So the problem becomes a lot of time is we might know the answer, but maybe we don't necessarily like that answer. So we're looking at ways that maybe we want to shop the quality. Because God's not going to contradict himself.
Right.
So if we're struggling with something, we need to put it up against the measuring rod of would what I'm seeking or would what I'm doing contradict what the Word of God says.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
And then we need to be confident in that.
Amen.
Because I think a lot of times the problem is we're not confident. David went confidently before Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have these big things, and I'm guilty too, when we have these big decisions in our life, or these big challenges in our life, or these big things that we're praying for, we need to be confident God is not going to contradict himself. He's not going to take us down the wrong route. And even though it might be painful or difficult, or we might be unsure, don't second guess that God is going to have us do something harmful.
Amen.
For ourselves, or not a benefit. And it's a hard thing to do. But sometimes I think we tend to approach prayer from a meek point instead of a bold point.
Confidence in him, not ourselves. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because we're like, oh Lord, okay, I need you, God. Instead of God, I'm giving this to you, and I know you're gonna lay the right decision on my heart. And I say I'm guilty of it too.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I have to just remind myself is, as things have played out in my life, God has never forsaken me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I might not like the things that were presented before me, or I felt like he was asking me to do things that I didn't personally want to do. But it's not because of him, it's because of me. So I want to be aware and acknowledge my shortcomings, but I want to have all the confidence in him. And he's never going to ask me to do something that he's not going to give me the grace to get through, or the ability to do it, or when it becomes difficult is when we take our eyes off of him, and when we doubt what we can do through him.
Yeah, there are times when we're facing major decisions like you're talking. There are other times when, okay, could go either way, and we just generally don't know. Okay, God, I mean, like I said, there's some things God doesn't care about. Do I have chicken or spaghetti for dinner tonight?
Right.
Not a lot of spiritual significance, I imagine, in that necessarily. So one of the things that I would encourage us all to do, as I've said before, is when you're facing a decision, first and foremost, step back and say, okay, God, right now, as it stands right now, I don't know. God could have A, God could have B. I don't know. So before I go any further, let me prepare myself here's a check to make sure we're hearing God clearly, to avoid the bias that Sister Ashley mentioned, the personal confirmation bias and all that stuff, hearing what we want to hear. If God were to have A as the answer, can I be okay with that? If God were to have B as the answer, can I be okay with that? And be honest with ourselves. And don't go any further. If someone needs an answer immediately, the answer is no. Great piece of advice my first pastor, Brother Dan Maynard, gave me. Because usually things aren't an emergency. If you're being pressured, then it's not coming from a good place, and bad decisions are made in a rush. Usually a decision doesn't need to be immediate. But if I am okay with A, but not quite okay with B, then I need to stop and take the time to get right with the fact that B could be an answer that God has. And when I'm clearly, honestly, and openly okay enough with either answer, then I'm in a position to seek God and allow him to do whichever one. And then I'm okay when I get the answer. But again, getting that answer is spending the time. To Sister Ashley's point about the Lord not contradicting, I cannot tell you how many times in my 20 plus years of serving the Lord with his people, I have heard someone say, the Lord's leading me to do or go X, Y, Z, whatever. And I just look at them and I want to go like this, because I know exactly the scriptures that are being contradicted in what they're saying.
Right.
And I know exactly the things that are, and I'm not saying this judgmentally, I'm saying it out of broken heart because I want good for everyone and I care about everyone. I know exactly the things that are wrong in this person's life who's feeling the need to draw attention and proclaim this and go pursue this, when I know it's going to be disaster because the things that are blatantly wrong, that they're looking for this as an escape for, instead of fixing what needs fixing, what's right in front of them. And God's not in any of that. And it ain't going to be good. And every time, it wasn't. So there are major decisions, and then there are just day-to-day life decisions. And both God cares about. And so it's a case of here, really good conversation and discussion with hearing God and how we hear God now versus how they just heard God then. Really great point, Brother Clay. Just because we don't hear God like they heard God, we still hear the same God if we take the time to hear him and know him. The more we know him, the more we recognize him when we hear him. This is what Jesus' whole point was, that when he was celebrating Hanukkah in John chapter 10, my sheep know my voice. I'm the good shepherd. So is it that God is speaking? We just don't recognize his voice because we're not tuned into it, dialed in enough, because we're not in the habit of hearing his voice. What if God's not saying anything? Sometimes God doesn't speak words. So what if God's not saying anything? Then if God, let me put it this way, let me give you some reassurance on that. If God's not saying, look out for the cliff, there's no cliff. If we're genuinely hearing God clearly, if he's speaking. Which means, if God's not urgently speaking to you in the moment, that means there's no urgent danger in the moment. Which means, keep doing what you're doing. What you know is right to do, that is to say. And keep listening for when he does speak, because we don't want to miss it. So, Lots of stuff to say on that, lots of good conversation, but any other thoughts, reactions on the topic of hearing God and Moses and Aaron missing the boat here and missing out? Yeah? Alrighty, so let's see here. Let's continue on back in Numbers chapter 20. Actually, let's go to 1 Chronicles chapter 23. Because why not? Happening at this time frame here. Scroll down. 1:23. There it is. 1 Chronicles chapter 23. Just because it's still part of what's happening in this time frame, and as we're going through the Bible, rather than cramming a whole bunch of Chronicles all at once, it does take place over a long period of time, so we'll take it in bite-sized pieces. 1 Chronicles 23, verses 16 and 17 tell us this. 1 Chronicles 23:16. Well, let's back up to 15 to get the context. 1 Chronicles 23:15, the sons of Moses were Gershom and Eliezer. The son of Gershom was Shebuel, the chief. The son of Eliezer was Rehabiah, the chief. And Eliezer had no other sons, but the sons of Rehabiah were very many. So on the screen here, so we've got Levi of the 12 tribes of Israel, his son Kohath, who had Amram. Amram married Kohath's sister, Amram's aunt, Jochebed. Amram and Jochebed had Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. Aaron had Eliezer, who had Phinehas, and then the line of high priests. Moses, as we read here in verse 15 of 1 Chronicles 23, Moses' two kids, while he was in Midian, on the run from Egypt, were Gershom and Eliezer. And we learn here, and as the next generation is coming up, that Gershom, in verse 16, the son of Gershom was Shubal, that guy right there. And 17, the son of Eliezer was Rehabiah. Then on from there, Eliezer had no other sons. Rehabiah had a whole bunch. Okay. So life is happening. Moses is a grandpa, and the kids are going forward. We will pick up next week with the journey resuming and them looking to pass through the land of Esau. Keep in mind, these are descendants of Jacob, so they're looking to pass through the land of Esau, Jacob's twin brother, and the Edomites, and we'll see how that goes and where they go from here, and this will lead up to the death of Aaron as well, as the last of this generation gets ready to die off, and the new generation gets ready to enter the promised land. So good stopping point there. Any other reactions, comments, thoughts, and questions on any of that? All good? All right, enjoyed being with you in class very much, and we will stop our screen share and stop recording, and let's get ready to go before the Lord in song and worship together.